person that has experience on a Mac that wants to act.
That's not true. That is not true. No, that's not true.
That I've talked to. I haven't met. Every one of those people at the conferences. And I talk to them. I ask every single one, and not one of them has ever once told me, "Yeah, I would run Linux if it was a better experience." All of them say, "Well, it works for me, and Mac OS works just fine."
No, Mac OS is a train wreck. Mac OS has been a train wreck for years, and I'm not the only person saying that. And here's the problem. Here's the fundamental problem with switching people away from Mac OS is it does do a lot of the things well that you needed to do if those things are a pretty standard user selection of things. And the fact that it has a shitty terminal that works like crap that you can replace if you need to, that's a plus for it too. But I think anybody who uses it for a little while under any kind of serious workload, there are so many problems with so many fundamental aspects of the operating system. You can't actually use it for serious work without running into issues with HFS Plus, for example. It's literally not possible, and it is a clown file system that has been around from the 80s. That makes ButterFS look like the fucking Cadillac of file systems.
Coming from you, that means something.
I'm not joking. I mean, it makes ButterFS look like the new coming of file systems compared to HFS, and they're shipping these $5,000 computers with this clown show of a file system. And here's an example of something you might run into. HFS only supports accessing one file at a time. Think about that for a second. Think about all the things that are going on in your operating system in the background that you didn't even ask it to do that require accessing files. Now, imagine a scheduler and a system that has been developed for the last 20 years to compensate for this really shitty limitation where it uses your RAM and it buffers and it caches. Now, picture this, right? So, you got yourself a photo library with 30,000 photos. It loads kind of slow for some reason. I'm not sure. I have a PCI SSD that's welded onto my fucking motherboard that is so fast it can do a gigabyte transfer a second, and yet for some reason my photo library runs kind of slow. I'm not sure what that's about. That's how you kind of notice it as like an average user. Like, well, I guess they're pretty big photos. I do have a lot of megapixels. That's what average users think. But when you're actually working on large video files and you're producing content of, maybe it's like a 60 gigabyte project and there's 200 assets associated with that project, and you go to load that effing project, guess what? It has to touch all of those files. Now just imagine you're exporting that project out and you're going out to a mezzanine file and it has to take every single one of those assets, it has to access every single segment file, and it has to render them into one cohesive file. Well, guess what you're doing? You're reading a file and you're reading hundreds of them and then you're writing to a file. Well, guess what HFS can't do? It can't access more than one file at a time, read or write, so it has to read, buffer, and then write. So just doesn't matter. You could have a Core i7, you could have 2 effing Xeons with 12 cores. You can have 32 gigabytes of RAM. You can have welded on PCIe Express storage that can do over a gigabyte of transfer a second, and you can only access one file at a second. And because Apple knows this, and they've put a whole bunch of lacquer up so you don't notice it, most of the time doesn't really affect anybody. But if you actually go to use the system to do any real-world work, you run into this limitation. And that's just one that makes Mac OS a completely unsuitable workstation OS. Now, if you're spending most of your time in a terminal and you're SSH'd into a Linux server where you're getting your actual work done, then you don't notice it as much when your $3,000 MacBook can't access more than one file at once. But when you're actually using it for work that actually pushes all that hardware to do what it's supposed to do, you notice it. And you know what's really funny? People notice this when they install Linux on the same exact hardware. It's phenomenally faster. Michael Dominic from Coder Radio, he has an old machine that he was running Mac OS on for a long time. Drive pops, he decides to put a new drive in, this time goes to Linux. Holy shit, he says, this runs so much faster. I don't even need to replace this machine anymore. I can't believe how much faster this computer is. You know why? One reason, you're not using HFS. One of many reasons. Now let's talk about their GPU drivers. Apple mandates that they ship the GPU driver with Mac OS X. Well, guess what that means? Apple doesn't give a shit about your special GPU application. Apple doesn't give a shit about gaming. So they have some of the worst video drivers in the industry. Hey, you bought yourself a Mac Pro with a really nice graphics card? You can't even go more than 60 frames per second on that thing. Oh, you want to go more than that? Go screw yourself. You boot into Windows, guess what? 300 frames per second for rendering. You do it under Mac OS X, 60 frames per second capped. Because that's what the driver caps it at. Why? Oh, they never got around to fixing it. But I hope you enjoy your $5,000 MacBook.
Please tell me Wirecast is recording.
Gabriel.